Good morning and welcome. I'm Daphne Richards, County Extension Agent for Horticulture with the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. Thank you for joining us for this webinar and our Drought to Deluge Gardening Series. It's our kickoff for the 2022 season. We've got a great program lined up for you today. A lawn for all seasons, best management practices for a healthy, happy lawn. As part of this program, our presenter may refer to various source material or websites. Don't panic if you don't catch those in time to write them down. All registrants will receive a link in a follow-up email, chock full of great stuff, including a link to the recorded session and links to any references or resources listed. Today, we'll be taking some questions when we break, as well as at the end of the program. In order to pose a question, you'll need to use the Q&A feature. Simply type in your question at any point and we'll address them at 2 times during our mid-morning breaks and at the end of the program. We'll get to as many of your questions as we can, and we'll follow up after the program on any that we run out of time for. Our presenter today is Dean Minchillo, a water conservation professional who's been at the forefront of conservation efforts in Texas for nearly 2 decades. Working for some of the most active and influential water providers in Texas. During his career, Dean has influenced statewide rulemaking, leading to enhanced water conservation and drought contingency measures, education and promotion of statewide irrigation rules to increase outdoor water use, efficiency, and reductions in water waste. Dean is now part of the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Urban Water Team as an extension program specialist serving Texans from the AgriLife Research and Extension Center in Dallas. Back when he lived in Austin, Dean was a very active member of my water-focused program area committee, and I'm excited to have him with us today. So without further ado, Dean, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Daphne. How are things in Austin?
Dry.
Yeah, same here. Well, thank you everybody for being here for this presentation. I hope you guys get a lot of information out of it to take with you that you can use. It will be a lot of information, and as Daphne mentioned, we're going to take a couple of breaks just to kind of let people get rid of some of the coffee that they've had earlier today. So I guess with that, let's go ahead and get started. Bring my screen up here. And all right, let's go. Can everybody see that? Okay. I think we're all in good shape. Okay, perfect. Okay, so as Daphne said, I'm a program specialist with AgriLife, and I'm out of the Dallas Center. So we have a team there, the Urban Water Team, which is actually now called the Urban Wish Team, which is Water Innovation and Sustainability Hub. And we address all things water, and my focus mainly is outdoor water use. And that's what I'm going to talk to you guys today about, is just how to really have a good, healthy, happy lawn in the face of drought. And as you can see, pulled up here already, the first slide coming right out of the gates is the drought monitor. This is the most recent edition of the drought monitor, and you can see there's a lot of red, there's a lot of burgundy, there's a lot of really dark colors, and we don't like dark colors, right? So dark colors are bad, and you can also see a little chart here to the on the bottom left that looks at where we were as far as drought conditions go all the way back to a year ago. And you can see that it's very variable, right? So it's been said before that Texas is in a constant state of drought that's broken by periods of rainfall. And we've been in a pretty good period of rainfall. The last really good drought we've had was quite a while ago. And since then, we've added quite a few people. to the state. So they are all going to get to experience this wonderful thing that we call drought, that hopefully we have come accustomed to as Texans, feel pretty comfortable with the fact that we know it's coming. And but what I'm going to talk to you about is give you some ideas of how we can make sure that we are weathering the drought storm. Uh-oh, I'm not advancing my slides. There we go. So the 3-month outlook does not look great. And I don't want this presentation to be doom and gloom, but I really want to set the stage, make sure that we understand kind of where we're coming from and where we are possibly going in the near future. So if any of y'all are familiar with these monthly outlooks, it really kind of just shows what the anticipation is as far as precipitation goes and temperature goes. And of course, we're looking at above average temperatures and below average precipitation. Those two add up to not good, right? You don't even need to do a lot of math on that. That's a pretty simple formula. And then there's also really, really good evidence that La Nina is going to be with us this summer and probably beyond into the fall. So for those of you who are new to La Nina and El Nino terms, a good way to sort of remember how they affect us is La Nina, or LA, means little agua. It doesn't really mean that, but in this term, it means little agua when it's for us. So not much rainfall. And when we're in an El Nino pattern, then that means extra liquid. So that's how you can kind of remember those two. But yeah, we're really gonna face some fun stuff coming up this summer. So, like I mentioned, we have a lot of people moving to Texas, right? I don't know how many people here are new to Texas and have come from various places around the United States or even the world. But we're growing, no doubt about it. And one of the things that I think is fascinating, it's kind of a comfort thing. People want to bring what they know with them when they go to a new place, or at least a lot of people do. You know, and some of that is plant material, things that are familiar to them. And part of what we do at AgriLife is try to help people understand what the specific county situation is that they're living in. What are really some of the good plants that they can grow? What are things that are going to do best for them? And what are some of the things that maybe the realization might be the reality that they can't have that particular plant or that particular comfort item. So hopefully we can help you find new items. But the people that are moving here are, like I said, just from all over the place. And then we also have just a lot of businesses moving here. And all of these things, people, businesses, they all play a part on our water supplies. They all impact our water supplies. And as a group of Texans, we need to do what we can to make sure that we are not necessarily punishing ourselves or doing something where we shouldn't, to where we're not comfortable with our water use, but we need to be sure that we are being wise with our water use. We're being good with it. We're being good stewards, and we're only using what we need. We're not wasting it. And that'll be part of what we talk about, is how to actually have what you want, but not waste water. So a big part of today's topic is going to be turf grass, the all important turf grass, sometimes divisive turf grass. But as divisive as it seems to be, it is a very important part of our ecosystem. There's an entire list here on this slide of things that turf grass does that synthetic turf cannot do, right? Just the smallest amount of turf grass can really, really have a big impact on filtering chemical pollutants for sure. So fertilizers, anything like that, and really on temperature too. So keeping that ground temperature nice and cool. Do you ever just want to take your shoes and socks off and run across a synthetic field in the heat of the day, kind of hopping along, burning the bottom of your feet? No, not really. I don't think anybody really wants to do that. But you do want to take your shoes and socks off and walk across that nice natural grass lawn, especially in the cool shade under a nice big tree. I mean, those are some of the things that we love about turf grass. And it's something you just can't get with anything else other than turf grass. And nope, turf grass is not native. It's been here for a very long time. But there's things we can do to where we're not just dumping water on it and wasting our precious resource, but also having a good quality product. And that's what we want, right? We want a nice green lawn that's healthy. And maybe a monoculture isn't right. Like, but a few weeds mixed in there is okay. A few other things mixed in your lawn grass is okay. And we're not trying to grow a golf course in our front yard either. So we need to leave that to the superintendents, to the professionals. But we'll talk all about that and what we need to do. I really just wanted to make you aware of all of the different things that we don't really think about turf grasses doing, right? We tend to focus on the negative things, right? But we don't really talk about the CO2 sequestration. We don't really talk about how nice green grass enhances property value, sound, how it just kind of abates that noise. So a lot of really, really great qualities in turf grass that we're not going to get with a lot of other things. And then plus, with so many people moving, we're also building a lot more, right? We're building a lot more buildings, we're paving a lot more, we're having a lot more hardscapes, so we're increasing heat islands, and we're also putting in more grass and natural grass. And sometimes there are consequences to that give that grass a bad name. And one of those things is just water waste, right? How many times have you people seen this scene? And it's nothing more frustrating than when you're driving down the street and your car, you just had it nice and washed and it's clean, and there's big puddles in the road from a broken sprinkler system. And it's even more frustrating when the sprinkler system is added to a puddle that was put there by some nice rainfall that just happened the day before or that morning, right? So, but scenes like this are a little bit of what give turf grass a bad rap. But what I have seen, and maybe if there's folks that are from the West that are a little bit more familiar with synthetic turf applications, what I've seen growing more and more is people are installing irrigation systems in their synthetic turf grass lawns and on fields, mostly for temperature abatement, to bring that temperature down and to suppress the dust from those things. Well, that doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me. If we're trying to conserve water by putting synthetic turf down, then now why are we using water on it to cool it down? So just doesn't make sense. Now, of course, synthetics, we don't really need fertilizers, we don't really need pesticides, but there's a proper way to do all of those things. And we're gonna talk about all of these things, and hopefully you guys walk away with some good information on that. All right, so the first thing we need to do is know what we're dealing with, right? So we need to get a soil test. Anybody who is trying to grow a lawn, trying to grow plants, trying to grow anything, right, has got to look at the soil. That's where it all happens, right? The soil is the key. And what we want is we want a balance. We want an appropriate soil with an appropriate pH, with appropriate nutrients in it to feed the plant, right? When we fertilize, we're feeding the plant in an indirect way, right? We're feeding the soil and then letting the soil feed the plant. That is how we really need to go about these things. So it's just like the human body. When we eat, we're eating for nutrition, for substance, a lot of times for taste, because there's a lot of really good food out there. But what those nutrients do is they feed our organs through our blood. And that's kind of the same way that it works with plants, right? We're putting nutrients into the soil and the plants are taking up those nutrients through their roots. So we want to make sure we've got a good foundation, a good soil foundation to start with. And the best way to do that is to get a soil test. And you can do this at any time, any of the county offices, especially Travis County. You can take your samples. You can get some of these fancy little sample bags that we have here. You can even put them in a Ziploc bag and turn them in with your form that you fill out. So and it's not expensive and it's worth it to do it, because now you've got a really good roadmap of where you need to go and what you need to do. And maybe you don't need fertilizers at all. Maybe your soil's good in nitrogen, it's good in phosphorus, it's good in potassium, it's good in everything. So you don't really need to do anything. Or maybe you're deficient in some areas and you'll want to correct those. And your soil test, which we'll talk about again in a little bit, will provide you with a little bit of a roadmap on how to get there. Right. So but generally we're pretty good, right? We're pretty good with our levels of nutrients, especially for turf grass, unless we're trying to grow some kind of exotic turf grass. But what we'll really be talking about is warm season turf grass, right? Cool season turf grasses are not going to make it here. It's just too hot. Absolutely. It's a scorcher out there. And unless you want to water constantly, which is not what we're advocating at all here, we want to reduce the amount of water use that we're putting on our plants. We're going to need to go with something that's a little more adapted to our area, and that's going to be warm season turf grasses. And we'll just go through tons of different varieties of turf grasses here soon. So, and here we are, turf selection and use. So some of you may be installing a new lawn. Some of you may have acquired an existing lawn that seems to be well established and you want to take care of it. Some of you have just bought a house and you're wanting to try and manage the new lawn that's planted. So what all of these things are with lawn, right, is all of these little things here, these bullet points, are all things that were taken into account when the lawn was put down originally. And if you're putting in a new lawn, you really want to focus on these things, right? So heat and drought tolerance, we already talked about that a little bit. Warm season turf grasses, right? They're going to handle our heat and they're going to handle our droughts and our water shortages. Now, typically in Texas, we get enough rainfall to support warm season turf grass with supplemental watering with irrigation. And we've kind of gotten a little bit flipped on that to where we're really supplementing our irrigation with rainfall. And that's not the right way. We really need to make sure we keep the script flipped in our heads and that our irrigation systems are really only to supplement Mother Nature and let Mother Nature provide first. And your grass is way happier for it getting the nice fresh rainfall. And then we need to consider traffic tolerance, okay? You're gonna have pets running across your grass. Are you gonna have kids running on your grass? Are you gonna have a corner house with a bus stop right by and you're gonna have all the people going to the bus stop are gonna cut the corner and go across your yard? Or is the only time you're gonna walk across your yard is when you're pushing a mower? I mean, these are all things to take into consideration when we're talking about different types of grass, because they all have these different benefits and they all have these different traits that we'll want to take into account. And then use, like how much time do you want to put into the turf And what do you really want to use it for? Do you want to make a small baseball field on the side of your house? Do you want to put a putting green in your backyard? I mean, what is the use, and then how much work do you really want to put into it? And then there's just a host of other things to really think about. But nowhere ever did anybody go to a landscape company or a landscape designer and say, please give me a landscape that allows me to do the absolute most work in the yard possible. No, that's never been said. It's always, give me a landscape that I don't have to do too much to, right? I need something that looks good, that's low use, and it's low maintenance and low water use, right? And so hopefully we can get you guys there. All right, so warm season turf grass characteristics, right? We talked about it. So high water use efficiency, that's what we need. We need high water use efficiency. And then high nitrogen use efficiency. And we'll talk a little bit more about nitrogen and turf grass here in a little bit, but we need something that doesn't really need to be fertilized all the time, right? And we need something that's going to grow good in our ideal temperature range, right? This 80 to 95 degrees, I mean, that is almost most of the year when you're here in Texas. I mean, look over at the cool season characteristics in that range of 60 to 75. I mean, that's like winter for us, right? And I don't even know if we have winter anymore. I always kind of phrase it as we have two seasons, early and late summer here. So maybe winter might be something we read about in history books in the future. But it's hot most of the time. So we have a really, really solid growing season for warm season turf grass. And drought hardiness, we've already talked about that, and this will be reoccurring. You'll probably get tired of hearing me say drought, but it's on its way, and it really, really causes a lot of hardships and a lot of consternation and a lot of stress that's really unnecessary. We need to go into drought with a good mindset and a good foundation for our plants and our landscapes, and we will come out of it on the other side with a good solid product. So no need to worry about it. And then we need something that will recover from stress, right? Drought is a stress. Low water use is a stress. Maybe we're giving it less water than it really needs. That's a stress. Foot traffic is a stress. Mowing is a stress. Everything is a stress on grass. So we need something that's going to recover good from all of those stresses, right? So nothing on the cool season characteristic side really bodes well for our environment, right? So that's why we're really focused over here on the warm season turf grasses. So, and here they are. We can pretty much, for Central Texas for sure, right? We can pretty much just scratch Bahia grass. Get rid of that, right? Bermuda grass, check, we want that. Buffalo grass, check, we want that. Centipede grass, scratch. Seashore, scratch. St. Augustine, yes. Zoysia, yes. So that's where our focus is going to be, right? Cool season, no. Scratch. You even see, like, when, and overseeding is usually done with some type of a perennial ryegrass or cool season type of annual grass. We even see those struggle. They will struggle even in our warm shoulder seasons. We'll see those types of grass struggle. Brown is the new green for us with turf grass. It's okay if it turns brown. We do not need to have that green color all year long, right? We need to have seasons. And if we only have two of them, well, then let's have one green and one brown. So let's just go ahead and throw that out there right there. So we don't really need to overseed. There's times when it's necessary for soil erosion or something like that. We're trying to shore it up, but in our general everyday lawn grass practices, we probably don't need to do that. That's an unnecessary activity. right? So we have, Texas is a big place, right? So really, really large place. And we have a lot of different average precipitation rates all the way across the state, from pretty much true desert all the way out in the very far west to pretty wet, pretty tropical all the way to the east and everything in between. Now you can see pretty much where we're existing in that kind of medium green to dark green to blue zone right in there. That's a pretty good amount of rainfall. I mean, we are really in there good. We're getting, a good 30 inches of rain or more. And that is good to support turf grass and a lot of really, really good quality plants that we have. If you look over at the USDA hardiness zones, you can see where we're at, and those zones kind of shift and move a little bit with our goofy climate and weather situations that we have going on. But for the most part, our warm season turf grasses are going to represent those hardiness zones. And here it is. So the green is pretty much go, right? That turf grass is good, and any of those areas in the green. The orange is kind of a transition zone. You get it to work, you might need to water it a little bit more. Areas of no color is really a no-go. You don't really want to use it in those areas, right? So you can see Bermuda grass pretty much covers the state. Zoysia grass is very, very similar. It's a very similar grass to Bermuda grass. So you can see that pretty much covers the state. St. Augustine, I mean, we're really kind of on the edge there. We can get by, we can use it, and it actually does really, really well. And there's the right place for St. Augustine, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But look at Seashore down there on the bottom right. I mean, obviously its name would lend itself to being along the coast, right? So, and centipede grass takes a lot more water and a lot cooler temperatures over there to the far right. And then buffalo grass, right? We hear a lot about buffalo grass, and it's really, really a neat grass, but it's a prairie grass, right? So there's no, it makes perfect sense that it's going to be at home right straight down through the middle of the state, right? And all those blackland prairie areas, rocky areas, hill country areas, all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. And that is really a happy place for that grass. So those are things that we want to think about when we're looking at different turf grasses. And then of course there's different varieties of all of these turf grasses, right? So in the zoysias, they just make my head spin. So oh man, I forgot an S on that zoysia grass. So we got zoysia grass. So we'll just say it's French. So with your St. Augustine, I mean, these are probably going to be pretty typical names that you've heard before, right? Texas Common, Raleigh, Palmetto, Floritam for sure, Marishade. I mean, those have all been in some form or fashion used here pretty regularly. Bermuda grass, of course, you have your common, which is what you'll see in a lot of places that are like just large fields, larger areas. And then you get into some of your hybrids, right? Your Tifways, your Tif Sport, your Tif Tufts, some of those. And those are going to be a little bit different of a turf grass. Those you're going to see more on like sports fields or higher trafficked areas. A little more work goes into keeping some of those turf grasses. And then zoysia, right? We've got our japonicas and our matrellas, and we have lots of different varieties of those. And you can get anything you want, from like a fine blade to a thicker blade to a shade to a sun. I mean, it pretty much covers the gamut, but there's a lot of them, and they all have different qualities. So you want to make sure that you're doing your homework on these and you're getting what it is that you're really looking for out of these grasses, right? And then buffalo grass, of course, 609 is probably the one that that seems to be most familiar. And buffalo grass is really different. Like if you are that person who just wants a grassy lawn that you just want to look at and you don't really want to do anything to, then buffalo is your grass, right? It's almost happy when it's left mostly alone, mowed a couple of times a year and not watered, not fertilized, but it needs sun, right? It's definitely needs sun, and you cannot treat it like these other turf grasses. You really, really can't. It is its own creature. Um, so selection, right? We need to talk about selection. And this may be for really a little bit more for those who are looking at either installing a new lawn or building a new house or anything like that, other than people who like already have an existing lawn. And we'll get to you guys here pretty soon. But we want to really look at the strengths and weaknesses, right, of all of these grasses and make sure that they're meeting our needs. So we're not even going to talk about Bahia grass, but we'll talk about Bermuda grass for sure, right? Strength, can handle the heat, can handle the drought, can handle traffic, and can handle disease because it doesn't get a lot of diseases, right? Its weaknesses, shade and weed encroachment. So it will travel and weeds will get into it very easily, but that's going to be the case with a lot of these turf grasses, especially in the beginning phases. But we need to think about certain things, right? When we're doing this, like how much shade do we have when we're putting down turf grass, right? Is it our shade from our own trees? Is it shade from our neighbors? Is it shade from a building? And what time of day is that shade going to be there? Because all these, they may say shade tolerant, like with St. Augustine or zoysia grass, but they still require a fair amount of sunlight to grow well, right? Buffalo grass, low inputs. So you don't really need to do anything with it. And it can obviously handle drought. It's a prairie grass. It exists on its own out there in the prairies. But moisture is a weakness to it, right? You can't water it. You can't really fertilize it. You can't really do a lot of things that you can do with other turf grasses with it. So it's a little bit tricky of a plant. And takes a little bit special care. St. Augustine, shade and density, right? You want your turf grass dense, because the more dense you can get it, the more it's going to snuff out those weeds. It's not going to allow light to get to the soil. It's not going to allow those weed seeds to germinate. Yeah, I wish that was totally the case in my backyard, but it's not. I still have some. Chickweed is like a favorite in my backyard, but in the places where my St. Augustine is really doing the best, where it's happiest, where it's the thickest, I really don't have any weed issues in there. So really, really good with that. And then of course, zoysia grass is kind of like sold as the latest and greatest. It seems like it's a new kid on the block, but it's really been around for a very, very long time. But newer varieties have come along to meet our needs and to meet some of the demands that we want. And then there's even like new St. Augustine grass coming out, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But one of the things is thatch. That's one of those things with zoysia grass, and we'll talk a little bit about why that is in just a minute. So and then of course slow establishment and slow recovery rate. Right. So we need to think about that when we're trying to get a turf grass established. How long is it going to take? And then with your traffic situation, right? It grows so slow, its recovery rate is really, really slow. So if you're going to have a lot of foot traffic on it, you're going to have a lot of pets running on it across it, then quite possibly zoysia is not going to be the grass for you, because it could very quickly wear spots and holes in it. So I'm doing okay. I'm gonna take a drink of coffee here. So we talk about sunlight, and the requirements for growing healthy turf grass. And you can see kind of the list here. Bermuda grass is way up there. And that's another reason why it's so popular on like large sports fields. You know, you can't have a large oak tree in the outfield of a baseball field, right? You don't want to have a line of shade trees down the middle of a football field, right? You just need to have it wide open and exposed. And that's where Bermuda grass really comes in handy, because they can take all of that direct sunlight, all that direct heat. Whereas you get down to your shade, St. Augustine is one of our best turf grasses for dealing with the shade. Now this says 4 to 6 hours minimum. I'm going to challenge that a little bit. 4 hours is pretty low. There's not a whole lot of plants that are going to grow in 4 hours, or at least grow healthy in that low of amount of sunlight, right? So you can definitely get away as long as that light is filtered, but it's got to have some really good light to it, right? So nothing's going to grow good with no sunlight. So here's a little example, right? So we have a Bermuda grass yard here, or lawn, or field, or whatever you want to call it, with these large trees on top of this little berm. And what do you see going on there, right? You see underneath those trees, you see there's just no grass whatsoever, right? A couple of things happening here. Shade, right? It's a lot of shade. This little area does not get enough sun for this Bermuda grass to grow. Plus, we're on a slope, right? So if we're watering, we're trying to water on top of this berm. We're trying to keep the water on this berm. So we're not really even getting probably enough water infiltration for turf grass to go. So what would you do in this situation? All right, would you thin those trees? Would you take the trees out? Would you keep just planting grass underneath them, and and just pulling your hair out when it's not growing well? No, you wouldn't do any of those things. This is Texas. It's hot. Trees are a premium. I don't care who you are, but trees are necessary. We've got to have them just for the shade. So I would say that we need to reevaluate this space. You've got a plant bed right here to the left underneath this tree. Let's go ahead and extend that plant bed out to where that grass line is, and let's plant something else in there that's going to be a lot more shade tolerant, right? Let's go with a ground cover. Let's go with with something that is not a turf grass, that's going to do well. It's going to stabilize that soil, stabilize that bank, and still give us a nice, really, really pretty landscape. All right, here's a little zoysia grass here on Texas A&M campus, and you can see it's a lot of filtered light running through there. This is a really, really high profile area. There's a lot of people that walk through here. There's a lot of attention paid to this. So this grass is thick, it's lush, it's healthy, and it is the perfect grass for this situation, right? Very little needs to be done to it, and it looks good a good portion of the year with that right amount of light. So with that said, though, and with what I said earlier about zoysia having a really, really slow establishment, here you go. Here it is where it has been sprigged or plugged, and you can see it's just not really going super fast, right? You can see the stallions on the top trying to reach across to each other to grow. But in this situation, right, you've got a lot of exposed soil. So if you haven't done all the work that you can do to get rid of the weeds and to get rid of everything else in that soil, you're going to be battling weeds the whole time. But once you get this grown in, it's going to be pretty thick, as you can tell by those clumps. It's going to be pretty hardy. But if you're wearing it out, you're going to have spots that are going to get exposed again too, just because of that slow growth and that slow recovery rate. All right, so here are just a few things to know, because zoysia is like one of those things everybody's always like, oh, what about zoysia? Oh, what about zoysia? It's kind of like people hope and want it to be that sort of silver bullet, that answer to everything that we do for turf grass, and it's really not. I mean, it's a great grass and it does a lot of really good things, but again, it's going to be right plant, right place is how we're going to have to do that. And what are you willing to do with it, right? So it does go brown a little bit earlier than some of the other grasses, especially a Bermuda grass. It will brown out in an extended drought period of time. It's not going to be as shade tolerant as St. Augustine, although are some varieties that are really, really good. But one of the things that that you really need to look at with the different varieties, right, is what are we doing as far as maintenance go? Which one is going to do good with under normal lawn maintenance practices, and which ones are going to need a little bit more effort, right? Again, how much work do I want to put into this lawn? What do I really expect? What do I really want to get out of it? And here's a little St. Augustine grass growing here on the left, and here's some St. Augustine grass growing at Washington on the Brazos Park, or historic site there. And you can see that it looks really good. It's doing really well in a nice manicured setting with some filtered light underneath these trees. It just looks good. Like I know my dog would run right over there and would lay down in that grass. And then I wouldn't be able to move him at all for days. He would just lay in that grass and just love it. You know, and then here with the Washington on the Brazos, you can see it's growing a little bit taller. In here, it's not quite as manicured, and it still looks really, really good. So, so it's not the evil plant that that people would like to make it out to be. It really, really is a good plant, provided it is in the right spot, right? It's given the right conditions. So a little bit more on the drought tolerance aspect. And I've got some more information on this as we run through the program a little bit later on. But if we're really looking for something that is truly, truly drought tolerant, we're looking for a grass that we don't really need to worry about at all, then buffalo grass and Bermuda grass top that chart, right? They are the best. Your japonicas are really, really similar to Bermuda grasses, whereas your matrellas are just a little bit more similar to the St. Augustine grasses with a little bit wider leaf blades. So, so that's kind of your layout. Here's your hierarchy for drought tolerance, and it's one of the reasons why we see Bermuda grass so widely used. We don't see buffalo grass as widely used, really just because of how particular it is in maintenance and care, as opposed to our traditional lawn grasses. Here's a little study that was done at College Station, where they had this Bermuda grass field here, and they just left it completely unwatered through the summer. And you can see how just absolutely brown and just devastated it looks in August, and then how quickly it rebounded by November. Now there's still some spots, there's still some stress, there's still some holes in it, but looks pretty good, right? Looks pretty good. Just looking at this should ease some of your angst as to watering restrictions or watering less. Right. And with that, we'll get into this. You know, it's really, when we're talking about watering, it's like application. Like, how are we getting the water on? Are we doing it right? Are we getting it where it needs to be? Are we getting in the root zone? That's going to be more important than how much we're actually putting on, right? Because we want to ease that water on. We want to encourage those deep roots. We want to get the water into where the nutrient zone is on the plants. That's how we're going to really get some good drought resistance in our turf grass. So with our traffic tolerance on our turf grasses, right? We have some of the zoysia grasses up there pretty high once they're established because they're really, really thick. But we want to be careful with that though, because I wouldn't recommend doing a zoysia grass on a football field, right? If it is going to be a lot of various traffic across it, not concentrated in one particular area, then I think your zoysia grass is going to be good. If it's a little more concentrated, then I think your Bermuda grass is going to be your better option. And of course, your St. Augustine grass doesn't really handle traffic very well. You'll probably not see a cricket pitch. I think, is it called a pitch? I know it's a soccer pitch planted in St. Augustine grass anytime soon in this general area, just because it would be a nightmare for the superintendent to deal with that and manage that. So again, keeping into consideration what this lawn is going to be used for. So, and then HabiTurf is here in the mix now with our other turf grasses, and it's kind of like a buffalo, but a little bit softer, right? It's a mix of buffalo grass, curly mesquite, and blue grama, which are all prairie grasses, but all of those three prairie grasses all have different attributes. They all have a little better wear tolerance. They all grow a little bit, green up a little bit faster. They all just have these little different attributes that are all blended together to create what is called HabiTurf. It's a little more lawn grass-esque. You can walk on it a little bit more. You can mow it a little bit shorter. You can kind of just take care of it a little more like you would a normal lawn grass, but still not quite as intensive as you would with a Bermuda grass lawn, right? So, and again, not really recommended in East Texas, just too wet over there for it, right? But definitely in the hill country for sure, right? Definitely going to be a great option in the hill country area. So here's some HabiTurf outside of SMU. And you can see this is like the perfect spot for it right here, right? There's very little going on in this area. It's full sun. Doesn't need to be heavily irrigated out here. It's hard to get out here with a mower and mow this area. Probably don't want to get out here and fertilize either. So this is a great place where you can just have a nice, thick, cool, just long grass growing, and it just kind of waves and sways in the sun and just does its thing and needs very little extra attention. So here's where we're going to take a little bit of a break, let you guys kind of absorb some of this and digest some of this, and we'll take just a few minutes, and if we have some questions, I think we can go ahead and answer some questions.
Yes, that's right, everyone. Thank you so much, Dean. We'll take a quick 3-minute break. I've got 10:50 on my watch, so we'll come back at 10:53 and pose a couple of questions. Welcome back, everyone. All right, Dean. Wow, so much great information so far, but something that I'm definitely going to steal that you said is little agua for La Nina. I just think that's great. So I'm going to be stealing that.
Yeah, that is a good one. Yeah.
We really like that. We do have a couple of questions. I saw that you were also typing one in the question and answer box. We'll do that as well. But one of the questions that we had was a person has zoysia grass and they've had problems with take-all patch. What's the best treatment for that?
Really just watching what's going on. I mean, there's not really a treatment for take-all. It's going to kind of take it all. And I don't really know what the very best treatment to do is. It's really like like a watering condition. You really just need to watch how you're watering and what's going on with the water. Do you have low stand spots where water is pooling? Is watering happening in the evening and sitting on the grass overnight? It's just kind of some little conditions like that will generally cause it. And if you want to shoot me an email, we can get to a little bit more in-depth answer as to what kind of treatments maybe you can try doing it. I don't want to just throw a bunch of stuff out at you and say, well, yeah, let's try this, but we really need to see what's going on, and we really need to identify for sure that it is take-all before you start treating anything.
That's what we tell people that contact us for sure. And it's
Yeah.
definitely environmentally exacerbated. So there's
Right.
definitely the first line of attack is to control the environment in the ways that you just described. So thanks a bunch. We did get a couple.
And we'll add one more thing, overwatering stress looks a lot like drought stress too. So we want to be sure we know what we're battling.
Absolutely. Always great advice. We got a couple of questions. Let's get very quick answers to. Since we're experiencing drought conditions, should we switch to liquid fertilizers? And I know you say you're going to talk about fertilizers shortly, so we'll loop back to that.
Yeah.
And then someone asked also quickly about buffalo grass and how much depth of soil it needs. And it's a prairie grass, and our soils are not very deep. So
no, you can grow it for sure on a shallower soil. We want to make sure that soil is a good quality soil and it has lots of pore space and lots of organic matter in it. It just may not do quite as well. You may have to baby it a little bit more in the shallower soil than you would in a unlimited depth type of soil that you would have in a prairie.
All right, I think let's move on, and we'll come back to questions here in just a bit. We have one more break, and then we'll take questions again at the end. So, all right, Dean, take it away.
All right. Okay. So now we're getting into the fun stuff. Okay. So we're going to talk about actual turf grass management, right? So when I mentioned earlier, all of these different things we do stress our grass out, right? So we've spent some time identifying grass. We know what's going to be the best for our situation. Hopefully or if we have an existing turf grass, there was a question about identifying turf grass. Hopefully we're able to identify it. We know what we have. Now we know exactly how we're going to maintain it. So we're going to talk a little bit about mowing, which seems really, really simple, but it actually has a big impact on our turf grass. We're going to talk about nutrient management. So we're going to get into fertilizers and that type of stuff. And we're going to talk about irrigation, and we're going to talk about cultivation, right? So we're going to talk about those four things in this segment. So pull your hat down tight because we're going to get into a whole lot of stuff, right? So mowing. Now, it's kind of one of those things where you can ask 20 different people and you're going to get 20 different answers, right? So, but there really, really is a happy space for turf grass where it should be growing, where it should be mowed. Now, you all hear these things about, the taller you let the grass grow, the deeper the roots are going to go. And that is true, but we also want to be careful we don't let the grass grow too tall to where we're adding extra stress to the grass or the grass is falling over. But there's also a space that we'll talk about where nutrient uptake is best in the soil for the root. So we don't really want to go beyond that because then we're not really getting our nutrients into the roots very well, right? So, but one thing that we want to do is we don't want to let our grass grow and grow and grow and grow and grow and then come and cut it. That's not good. That's very, very stressful for the lawn. It's even stressful for us when we let our hair just grow and grow and grow and grow and grow, and then we go get it cut short, and then we look really weird for a while. We've got that grow pattern, that time for it to grow in. So it's the same thing for us. just on a little different, on a different note. But so the 1/3 rule, which is something that that has been studied, it's been researched, it's been proven that you never really want to remove more than 1/3 of the grass at a time, of the leaf blade at a time. That's where it's going to be the best for the grass. You don't want to cut it too short because you can get into the crown of the plant. You can expose too much of the soil to light. And you don't want to cut it, let it grow, and then cut it, and then let it grow, and then come back and cut it. You want to just keep it like whenever it hits that sort of area where you're going to mow it and get that 1/3 of the blade off, then that's going to be the best, best for your turf grass, right? Here are some common mowing heights. These are, whoops, sorry, past that. These are the best heights for the best performance of your turf grass, right? And that's what we're looking for, right? We're looking for performance out of it. We want it thick, we want it healthy, we want it green, we want it lush, we want to do all of these things. And these are the heights that we're going to actually be able to get there a little bit more. And you can see on the hybrid Bermuda grass that we talked about earlier, some of your TIF type of varieties, a little bit shorter than your common, right? Your common can grow a little bit taller. Your St. Augustine grass, I mean, you can't, well, you can, but you really shouldn't be cutting St. Augustine grass down so low to where you can roll a golf ball across it. It's just not happy there. It just doesn't perform very well there. And then your zoysia grasses, again, are pretty close in that that growth range on that. But and you know, I'm not saying go out there with a ruler, you know, and measure it, but you can get a pretty good idea as to the frequency of when you need to mow to kind of maintain that 1/3 rule with your mower, and how high or low your mower needs to be to accommodate your particular type of turf grass. And I know there'll probably be some questions popping up about, you know, scalping and letting it grow taller during the season. And really, like, scalping is not necessary. You definitely don't want to scalp a St. Augustine lawn. You probably don't want to scalp your zoysia grass lawn, Bermuda grass sometimes, but really, honestly, you know, you can cut it really short in the beginning of the season, just kind of get some of the dander and litter and stuff off of it. But cutting it really short down to where like you're exposing the bare soil, that can be really stressful on the plant, really hard. So I'd recommend not doing that, but then I would recommend just keeping it at whatever traditional mowing height throughout the entire year. If it's in shade situation, you may want to let it grow a little bit taller in the shade, just so you have more sunlight on that leaf surface, so it'll grow a little bit better. But generally, keeping that same mowing height throughout the season is going to be your best bet. So here's a couple of pictures of Bermuda grass, right? So on the left here is a hybrid grass, right? This is going to be more of your TIF types. And you can see how closely together that grass is, how dense it is, right? That's why it's perfect for sports fields. The idea on a sports field is you want to be able to run fast on it, right? Or you want a ball to roll fast on it. You know, a golf course that has like tall grass and is soggy and wet is not going to be one that people are going to play very often. I don't play golf, and I even know that, right? But you want that grass firm, you want it dry, you want that ball to roll across it at a certain speed. Whereas that common, a little bit shaggier, a little bit looser, a little bit more open. So a little bit better for just like your traditional type of fields or practice fields, because you don't need quite as much inputs as you do with that hybrid. So I once heard a story, and I can't really verify it. I can't deny it either, though. But Josh Hamilton, who was center fielder for the Texas Rangers for many years, as he was getting older, he, developing a lot of knee pain. He couldn't run quite as fast. I was under the impression that they actually started to let the outfield grass grow a little bit taller at the stadium so he could easily run down balls that got through the infield out to the outfield a little bit faster. So don't know if that's true or not. It's a good story, but it also just kind of shows that you can really change how field performs with mowing height on grass. So if anybody knows Josh Hamilton and asks him that question, that would be, or the superintendent for the old Double field, that would be a pretty good question to ask. Okay, so here's that St. Augustine picture again, right? I just want to show how really high it is, right? I mean, now if you get right up to it, you could probably see how much taller it is, but you can see it's a pretty tall stand of grass. It's pretty happy there. It's doing well. It's doing what it needs to do. So talking about rooting depth, right? So if we are going to keep a really short turf grass, then we're going to have less depth on our roots. And what happens if we have less depth on our roots, right? We have less water uptake. We have less water holding, or well, we may have good water holding capacity in our soil, but we have less roots deeper down to grab onto that water and take that water up. So we're not going to have as much drought avoidance with our turf grass. We're going to require more frequent watering for something that is kept really short and kept really low. Hence, a golf course putting green, right? Those have to be watered very regularly because they have very shallow roots because they are cut really, really short. Whereas a fairway or a rough where the grass is left to grow taller, not as much water needed there because we've got a little bit taller grass, a little bit deeper rooting capacity there, right? So with the little picture on the right, and I know these are kind of hard to see. It's like, what am I looking at? But if you really look close, you can actually see all the roots in the core sample here on the right for the, well, it's called non-mowed, but it is just a tall mowed grass. You can see how many more roots they are, how deep they are, right? And when we're talking about watering and we're talking about watering properly, right, we want to use that soil as kind of a sponge in a way. We want to get the water down deep into the soil and it's going to last longer down there, right? Your soil is going to dry out faster on the upper parts of the soil and slower in the deeper depths of soil. So we want to get our roots down in those deeper depths to where they can still have access to moisture, to water for that drought survival aspect. So we talk about, oops, went too far. All right, so we talk about fertilizing, right? And some people, maybe they know, right, exactly what they're doing. Maybe some people don't know. Maybe some people are kind of new to this whole thing and they just walk into the big box store and whatever is on the pallet to the left, they grab, they're like, oh, this must be what time of year to put this on my lawn, right? But really we need goals, right? What is the goal? Why are we fertilizing our lawn? What do we want to get out of it, right? And I talked about how we're using the lawn, right? If we are high traffic area and like a sports field, right, then we're going to need more applications of nutrients to keep that grass growing good, right? So that's one thing of a goal, right? We want to keep this grass good under high stress, right? We did our soil test. We know that we've got some deficiencies in nutrients, right? Okay, so now we need to fertilize to replace those nutrients. Oh, we're low on nitrogen. Oh, we're low on phosphorus. So we want to make sure that we're picking fertilizers too that are going to correct those imbalances, right? We don't want to just throw something on just to throw something on. We want to do everything with purpose. It's important because remember, we are feeding the soil that is going to feed the turf grass. Okay, so that's why that soil test is so important. We need to know where we are. You can't go on a diet, right, without weighing yourself first So you know where you're going and how you're progressing along. And that's where our soil test comes into. It's that benchmark, right? It's that diet. Oh man, I'm here and I want to be here. So I got to start at this point and make my notes, right? And we just want to be sure that we're doing everything appropriately, so we're getting the maximum benefit out of our nutrient program, right? And we don't want to cause bad stuff. We don't want to do bad things. We do enough bad things as it is, right? Right. So we got a lot of stuff in our heads that we would love to eliminate. Nobody likes to see trash blowing down the road, plastic bags stuck in trees. I mean, we've got a lot of these issues, people not picking up after their pets. All of this stuff attributes to pollution, right? But what we're really talking about is the impacts of polluting our water, right? So fertilizer is a big cause of eutrophication, which is essentially just too much nitrogen and phosphorus accumulating in the water, right? And that water runs down, it gets into our ponds, our deltas, our different little areas, right? And it creates these algae blooms. And what happens when you have an algae bloom? The algae robs all the oxygen out of the water. What happens there? You get dead fish. What happens next? You get a stinky, dead fish, ugly looking pond, right? So, and there's lots of things that we can do, and we're not even going to get into them, but there's lots of blue-green infrastructure things we can do, or green infrastructure, or buffer strips. There's lots of things that we can do to help combat some of this stuff. But it's just an education process, and we won't even get into that. But what I want to do is just make sure that everybody is aware that what we do on our own lawns has implications everywhere else. And that's part of this nutrient program. We want to do things with purpose, and we want to do them right. We're going to talk about fertilizers. We're going to talk about measuring that out. We're going to talk about we're making sure that we're doing what we need to do that is appropriate, right? And not going overboard. So some of the things that will cause eutrophication, we talked about pet waste. Of course, fertilizers are there. But I don't know about you guys, but it just absolutely drives me bananas to see these mow and blow companies just blowing grass and leaves and everything else out into the street. And it drives me crazy for a couple of reasons, right? Well, more than a couple probably. But, one is you're just creating a problem for somebody else, right? It's like, just sweep it up, take care of it, be done with it. Don't make it somebody else's problem by blowing it out into the street. Where do they think it's going to go, right? Is it's going to go down the storm drain eventually? And then where does it go from there, right? Oh, I don't care, out of sight, out of mind. No, it goes to the creek, right? And what's in all of that plant material? Nitrogen. Nitrogen and phosphorus is in all of that plant material. And we'll talk about how beneficial leaving your clippings on the lawn is in just a minute. But we just want to think about all these little things that we're doing, right? And just let's be conscious of it all. Your soil test. This is what it looks like when you do a soil analysis and you get it back. It's going to give you all of this information. It's going to give you your what you have as far as nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, your big three, all of your micronutrients, and it's going to tell you whether you're in a good range, low range, high range, excessive range. And at the bottom, it's going to give you a little bit of a program of how to manage what the soil test has revealed, right? I said in my soil test, I got it back. It pretty much just said at the bottom, lay off the nitrogen. I was way too high on the nitrates in there. So that was kind of my program, was like, stop, just whatever you're doing, just stop. But one thing you really want to do, no matter if you use the little sample bags that I had a picture of earlier, or if you're putting it in Ziploc bags, you want to write down on that bag where that soil sample came from. And don't just take samples of the good looking areas in your yard. Take samples of the bad areas in your yard too, and write it all down, right? So if you have, like one side of your yard is terrible, one side is great, and take samples out of both of those, but write on the bad good side of backyard and bad side of backyard. So when you get these results back, you know which one applies to which area. The techs at the lab, they don't really care what you put on there. You can put grandma's flower bed on there, whatever. They don't care, but they are going to transfer that information to this form for you, so you know where this sample applies to, right? So this is what we want to do. And if we've really got some issues that we're really trying to combat, then we definitely want to do this test annually. If we're doing okay, we're making progress and everything's looking good, then we probably don't need to do it annually. But you want to do it every once in a while to make sure that you're still in check before you do have an issue, right? So there are some basic requirements that we put out there for nitrogen, for turf grass, and these are flexible, again, based on what we want for our turf grass, what kind of performance we want, and what's going on with them, right? Heavy trafficked areas, you're going to probably need more nitrogen than less trafficked areas. And then, of course, based on the type of turf grass that you're using. But get your soil test, and it'll really hone in on these requirements, right? So again, just like I mentioned with your nitrogen inputs, it's really going to depend on what type of grass you're doing, what you want your grass to look like. If you're okay with something that's just a little bit, off color, maybe not quite super pristine, then you can go a little bit less. But if you need something that's perfect, then you want to make sure you go a little bit more on that. And what kind of abuse or stress that lawn is taking. The more stress, probably the more inputs we're going to need to do for that type of lawn, right? So, but don't do this, okay, right? This is way too late. Definitely not following the 1/3 rule. Probably over fertilizing to get the grass to grow this fast. That is just a huge amount of stress. And when we talk about thatch, right? A lot of people are like, oh, don't leave the clippings, it'll create thatch. Well, that's not true. That is not true at all. Over fertilizing and overdoing it with a turf grass like that, that is what's going to create thatch. When you're mowing too much and that layer is building up on the surface down at the crown of the plant, and it can't break down into the soil, that's when we're going to get more of a thatch issue. And it is more of a problem with zoysias than it is any other turf grass. But that's really where our thatch issues come from. Don't not let your clippings lay on the grass because you're afraid of thatch, especially if you have a St. Augustine or Bermuda grass lawn. And here's the reason why, because we can really add a lot of nitrogen back to our turf grass by just leaving the clippings, right? So if our application rates are like 1/2 pound to 1 pound per 1,000 square feet, we can almost get that just by leaving our clippings, because you got to remember how much of that plant is actually nitrogen, right? All right, so we talked about cool season versus warm season turf grass. And here's where we get into fertilizing and when it is appropriate to do that. Timing is everything with this step. And when we talk about timing with turf grass, we also have to talk about like products that claim to be a pre-emergent, like a weed killer and a fertilizer, because those two things, right? Pre-emergent application and fertilizer application happen at very different times for us with our warm season turf grasses, right? So with your pre-emergent, you want to get that down before the soil warms up to the point to where weeds are starting to germinate, right? So that is going to be like kind of that February, March timeframe, right? For you guys in Central Texas, probably going to be towards the end of February, very beginning of March, right? Maybe even a little longer, like this year. I think we had a little bit longer because we had cooler temperatures later. But you're not really going to fertilize until you're well into spring, really, right? So that grass starts growing, you've got some active growth going. That's when you're going to actually fertilize. So two very, very different times of the year when we're doing that type of stuff, right? So just keep that in mind. And it's okay to do pre-emergence if you want, do whatever you want and fertilize whatever, it's your program, right? But just remember those two things have to happen independently to be successful. So, but looking at the growth chart, the bell curve, it's what everybody wanted in school with test grading. They wanted that nice bell curve on there. You can see where the grass is most actively growing, right? During the summer, when we're hitting those high temperatures we talked about earlier. This is when my lawn crew, who is a 15-year-old, rolls his eyes every time I ask him to mow the lawn. He is busy during the summer, cutting the grass, right? Once every 5 days for sure, easily, maybe even once every 4 days to keep the lawn in check, to keep that 1/3 rule going. And then you can see how it tapers off in the wintertime where it's not actively growing. So we don't really need to fertilize at that point, right? If we do our fertilizer program up front and we hit like 1 in the fall when it's starting to taper off, we should be good throughout the rest of the year. So we do have these average last spring frost dates here. So these are kind of our pinpoints of when we want to start thinking about adding fertilizers, right? We don't want to add a bunch of fertilizer and then have it freeze, right? We don't want to do it too early and have it just evaporate into the environment. So we want to look at these recommended programs here for when we want to do that, right? So definitely want to get that done in October. And it makes sense because we're going to want to water in our fertilizer, right? So when we water in our fertilizer, we want to just do that probably manual. October, we should be in manual mode on our irrigation system to begin with. All right, fertilizer. I don't know how many of y'all feel comfortable with fertilizer bags, understand fertilizer numbers and analysis and all that stuff on there. And it's crazy. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk to you briefly about this. And then I'm going to talk to you about how to make sure that we're measuring it out, fertilizer appropriately, so we get the best bang for our buck with our fertilizer. And we're only using what we need, right? So we've got our N, P, and K, or nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus right there on the label in that order. This bag here, it shows that it's basically 28% nitrogen, but look out underneath there. 50 pounds covers 14,000 square feet. So if this is a 50-pound bag, right, it's going to cover 14,000 square feet. If your lawn is like mine and it's like 5,000 square feet, if I put this whole bag on my lawn, I am wasting it. Fertilizer, that is all running off. It is all going straight into the streams, so the creeks. It is not good. So we definitely want to pay attention to how much this covers. Most of your organics are in slow release are going to be based on a 4,000 square foot lawn, so it's a little easier to manage. So here's a little quick analysis for you on how to measure it out. So here's the scenario: 5,000 square foot lawn. Your application rate recommended requirement is 3/4 pound per 1,000 square feet and you're using a fertilizer at 28,512. I would never recommend that. I'll stay a lot lower on the nitrogen. This is going to be a little bit more of a faster release type of fertilizer. So how many pounds do you really need to apply to your yard? So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to flip that 28 to a percentage, to a decimal, right? And then we're just going to calculate it out. And we're going to say that 2.68 pounds of this particular analysis fertilizer is what we need to get the nitrogen input down per 1,000 square feet. And we're doing 5,000 square feet. So we're going to need 13.4 pounds of this 50-pound bag of fertilizer on our lawn, right? That is definitely not the whole bag of fertilizer, right? It's a quarter of the bag of fertilizer, right? So then you're going to, the next question is, oh, how do I know I have 13 pounds? Well, best way to do that, take a scale, take a bucket, put the bucket on the scale, fill the bag up with fertilizer till you hit 13.4 pounds. And then, you know, if you're always using this fertilizer, you can draw a line on the bucket and you always know where to fill it up from there. I hope that helps. You can go back and look at this and play with the math as well. But essentially, we just want to know what's on the label. We want to read the label. We want to know what we're doing with this, and we really don't need a whole lot of potassium and phosphorus in our lawns. Generally, our soils are pretty good with that. Again, your soil test will actually tell you about that. So when we're over applying, we can get into nutrient runoff situations, right? So, and I just talked about it, it's bad, right? Don't ever be like the guy who grabs the spreader and the fertilizer because the skies are welling up and the rain is about to come down, and you fill up your hopper and you run across the lawn spreading the fertilizer down because you want to save water and you want that rainfall to water that fertilizer in. Well, that rain, we don't know what we're going to get. Do we ever know what kind of rainfall we're going to get? If we even know if we're going to get rain or not, we'd have 100% chance of rain and it turns to 100% chance of nothing, right? So, but we could get just a dump that, 1 inch per minute rainfall that comes down, or we can get that nice, long, slow soaking rain that we want to, but always just water it in by hand or manually with your sprinkler system. But let's be conscious of what we're doing, how we're applying that, right? So, so some tips for doing that is use the cycle and soak method, okay? And I believe I talk about this here in a little bit as well, but this is where you water some, you let it soak in, you water some more and you let it soak in, and then you water some more and let it soak in, right? With heavy clay soils, that is the only way to really get the water down deep into the soil. Clay soil has a very, very low infiltration rate, way slower than most of our sprinkler outputs will deliver. So we want to kind of spoon feed it as we push that nutrients down into the soil. So I talked about the clippings here and how much of a benefit they can be to our soil. So up to 50%. So right, if our recommendation is half of a pound of nitrogen per year, right, on there, or 3 times a year or something, we can cut that in half to a quarter, right? So that means a bag of fertilizer is going to go a lot farther than originally, right? And then plus that decomposed material is going to feed all of those micronutrients. I talk about balance. We need balance in the soil. Part of that balance is having those micronutrients in the soil, having those little guys eat, move around, and open up pore space for water holding capacity and for oxygen and all of that stuff in that soil. We need those guys in there. We need to give them some good food, and they're going to rather like what's coming from your clippings than from what's coming out of a bag, right? Here's a study that was done back in the 80s that kind of proved that whole theory of how much that would, the clippings would yield as far as nitrogen goes from there. So, and you can look this study up and you can read it. The reading is wonderful material. It's very exciting. So as any of those studies usually are, to read those. So sometimes I have to read a lot of literature review stuff, and when I come across one that's written really well, I get giddy because there's so many that are just so dry. So, okay, going back to fertilizers a little bit and talking about applying it appropriately. Right now, if you want a watermelon lawn, this is the way to do it. But we're talking about applying the right amount, the only what we need now. So since we're minimizing that, we are reducing our error, right? We don't have as much room for error. So we need to be more judicious with the way that we're putting down the fertilizer, right? So this guy obviously missed a step, but whatever fertilizer he was using really greened up his grass pretty good. So when it comes to spreaders, do not assume that the spreader you're using is going to either be calibrated appropriately or is going to be listed on the fertilizer bag that you're buying. So fertilizer bag will list all these different spreaders. Not always the case. It's very rare that it all goes together. It's just kind of a marketing thing, in my opinion. If I'm buying this kind of fertilizer, well, I should buy this type of spreader for it. Best thing to do is measure it out and make more passes. Apply it slowly to the ground. If you've got to make 4 passes across your yard to put it all down, or not all of it, but put down the amount you want to put down, then you're going to get better coverage, right? So let's go ahead and do that. And if you're borrowing a spreader from your neighbor, who knows what it's set on. So make sure you're paying attention to that kind of stuff. Here's what Watermelon Guy did with his rotary spreader is he just went back and forth, round and round, overlapped his wheels, on the lines. He did all that right, but what he didn't do is this. He didn't come back the other direction for the full coverage, right? So that's going to give you the coverage that you need. That's going to give you the result you need. And then you're not going to have to use excess fertilizer to get the result you need if you're just following the program, right? And of course, water it in lightly, right? Don't let rain do it. Don't let Mother Nature do it. Let's go ahead and let's just put it in light and slow and work it down into the soil. So we want to get it down in there to where those roots, the plants, can actually take up those nutrients. Because again, right, that's what we're doing. We're feeding the soil to feed the plants. Okay, here's our next break. We've arrived.
That's right, everyone. Let's take another quick 3-minute break and we'll come back promptly at 11:34. All right, everyone, welcome back. We're going to take a couple of questions before we dive back in. And Dean, one of them is from way back earlier in the conversation. We've talked about all these different grasses, St. Augustine, Bermuda, zoysia. What does someone do if they don't know what type of grass they have?
Well, they call you. That's what they do. So call Daphne and ask her. So you can take pictures of it. You got to get some really good close-ups of it, and you can send those in and we can look at that. We can try and make a determination. You can bring some samples in to your county extension office. And some of them look so similar. You really got to get down and look at the crown of the plant and look at how the leaf blades split off. It can be really, really difficult. But yeah, I mean, just use Daphne for sure as a resource there, because she's going to be able to help get that question sorted out. You can send us photos too as well. Dr. Chrissy Seegers is in my office and she is the statewide turfgrass specialist. So if we have really good photos of your grass, we can see if she can identify based on those photos.
And I'd say also, Dean, you can tell zoysia grass is very similar to St. Augustine, depending on the type of zoysia. Bermuda is very different. Obviously, buffalo is very different. So some of those larger distinctions, someone may be able to make on their own and make some decisions. But yes, and we will send everyone the links to the phone number for how to reach us to ask questions and an email where you would email those pictures in, as Dean suggested. All right, let's do one more question before we dive back in. And someone asked about rocks in the landscape versus turf. And we've talked around this issue, and I want to point out, as you did, that turf gets vilified in the landscape. It does not have to use as much water as many people give it. We can allow it to go brown in the summer and go completely without water, as you've shown. And so, we do often tell people there's no need to take out your turf grass and replace it with rocks, but people still do. Can we just kind of talk about the importance of turf grass, kind of loop back to some points you've already made just with this rock question in mind?
Yeah, I think when we're talking about turf grass and we're looking at a turf grass yard, we really need to be smart about it. And maybe the whole yard doesn't need to be all turf grass, and maybe the whole yard doesn't need to be all rocks. But we need to be careful. We need to think about where and how we're doing this. Places that are difficult with turf grass to mow or to manage, then maybe those are really good places for plant beds and rocks. But if your thought is that you're going to reduce your water use by eliminating all the turf grass, that's not necessarily true. Some of these plants will take quite a bit of water. Some of the maintenance in these plants is quite a bit too. So we just want to be really careful and we don't go to the extreme and tear out all the turf grass and get rid of all of those benefits, the carbon, the water, the heat, the cooling, the microorganisms, and just cover it all with rocks and grass. That is a particular environment that happens in the desert. And like I said before, we get a lot of rainfall here, even though it's not when we want it, but we get plenty of rainfall here to support turf grass.
Okay, one more clarification I'd like to do before we jump back in. We've talked about fertilization and how much to apply, and we did mention frequency, but just to bring that point home, how often should people fertilize their lawn to keep it in an easier to maintain frequency of mowing? So we kind of talked around those issues. Bring that point really home clearly. How often should people fertilize or not fertilize their lawns?
Yeah, well, I would say if you're not going to do a soil test and you really want to fertilize, 2 times a year is probably great for you, right? You can do one in the spring as the grass is starting to grow and is starting to really emerge, and then you can do it again in the fall as you're starting to go into dormancy. And usually you're going to be so active, your grass is going to be growing so good in the summertime, you don't really even need to mess with that. So that would be my recommendation, and keep it low. Keep a slow release fertilizer, low nitrogen amount. Like, I typically use a 500 when I fertilize, and keep that to, like half or 1 pound of that fertilizer per 1,000. Don't really go over that. Go with that slow release and let it do its magic.
Great. That really helps clarify that question, because I think we have these publications, these wonderful AgriLife publications that tell you about ideal situations and how to keep everything kind of lined up, but they try to mix between sports field advice and homeowner advice, and it's challenging for some people to read between those lines and just get that bottom line of, if I don't want to water my grass like crazy, mow it like crazy, what's the least amount of input that I can put in to manage all of that? And I agree with you on the 2 times a year, and to definitely pay attention to that last frost date, as you pointed out, because it changes year to year. We had a late cold spell this year, so that might push it back a little bit, but any fertilizer applied before the grass is really active and green is a waste of money and resources, because the grass is not growing to take advantage of it. So,
for timing, I don't really think you should fertilize until you've mowed the grass, probably at least twice, because then it's actively growing. And at that point, things are good, the soil's warm, it's ready to accept that fertilizer. I mean, that is really just a great rule of thumb to go by.
I love it. All right, let's let you dive back in.
Okay. All right. I got to get rid of that. And whoops. Y'all like my little coffee break thing? Loading. Okay, so now we're going to talk about irrigation, right? So this is the $1 million question, is how much do I water? Okay, well, we really don't need to water quite as much as we think we should. But but we need to be sure that we're watering the right plant material, right? So this study, which I alluded to, oops, and I went too far, and I alluded to earlier, is this study that was done by Texas A&M and San Antonio Water Systems, or SAWS, that looked at a bunch of different turfgrass species and exposed them all to 60 days of drought. Now, it was replicated on 4 inches of soil, and then on what they called unlimited depth of soil, which was 12 inches of soil, right? Some of this may hurt some of y'all in the Austin area, but they exposed all of these to 60 days of drought. They had this kind of like cool, like cover thing that covered up the grass that wouldn't allow it to get wet whenever a certain amount of grass fell on it. But what was amazing with this whole thing is that everything went dormant, right? On all, across all varieties, all soil types, they all went dormant. And I am simplifying this to like the nth degree. It is very, very simplified. But what was really amazing is when they started watering it all again, right? When they started to water it, really nothing survived that was on that 4 inches of soil, right? That's hard for some of you guys to take, but we're talking about 60 days of zero water. But everything on the unlimited depth of soil rebounded. Everything came back. Now, some of it didn't come back as great as it was before. Some of the uniformity was off, some of the coloring was off, but the key is it all survived, right? So that means that if we can get moisture to stay in the soil, right, then we can have a really good chance of having some heavy duty drought avoidance on this. And now for those that have like a limited soil profile, that really just proves that we really need to do the best that we can to improve that soil and make sure that soil has the most holding capacity possible, right? So again, I was a link to that study there, so you can go back and you can read that. More really, really good bedtime reading, especially if anybody tosses and turns a lot. That will just fix that problem right there, to read that study. But it's interesting stuff. So here's a little picture of just that thing that they use to cover over the grasses. You can see some of them have fired, some of them have not quite succumbed to the drought yet when this photo was taken. Okay. So, oops, here we are. All right, how much does my lawn need, right? So there is this watermyyard.org program. There may be some other programs out there, and they all have this basic recommendation of how much water your lawn needs. And a lot of times, 1 inch is tossed out. You need 1 inch of water per week. You know, oh, that's awesome. Well, how do I know how much 1 inch is? Well, I don't know, but we're going to give you some tips to help you figure out that, right? But what the key is we're trying to get to a place to where we are only replacing what the plant needs or what the plant is losing, right? And that is where science comes in, and this evapotranspiration. So basically 2 words, evaporation and transpiration put together into evapotranspiration, right? So this is just evaporating moisture out of the soil and transpiring moisture out of the plant surface. And we have this Penman-Monteith equation, which is all a whole bunch of sciencey stuff. So we're looking at wind, solar radiation, humidity, and putting all of this stuff together, crunching it with other information about the plant, and we're coming up with what is called a reference ET, or how much a plant transpires, how much water is a plant using. And then we use these other things called lysimeters, which measures how heavy the soil is with moisture. And that's also given us an indicator of how much moisture the plant is losing. And we come up with this coefficient, right? This crop coefficient based on warm season turf. And we know based on science, and I'm again super simplifying this, just for, this is a whole like 2-hour presentation all in its own, just talking about ET. So we're trying to get at how much water do I really need to put back into my grass every week. And so essentially, 1 inch is on the high side, right? But we have a certain percentage that we need to replace based on these evaporation rates. And you can tell that evaporation rates go up in the summer and go down in the wintertime. So it's not consistent, but we need to adjust how much moisture we're replacing into the plant seasonally, right? So we don't need to water 100% from spring all the way through fall, right? We need to taper in 25%, 50%, 100% in the summer, taper back down 75%, 50%, 25%, 0 in the fall and into the winter. Now, luckily, a lot of this information has been done. These formulas have been crunched. You can find this information on the Texas ET network. But if you want to do it on your own, you want to find it here for your particular yard, right? Then we need to know a couple of things. And precipitation rate is one for your irrigation system. So you may need to do a catch can test to figure this out. There's a couple of ways you can do it, but that's how we're really going to be able to nail down exactly what your precipitation rate is. How much water is your sprinkler putting out and how much is your grass taking up, right? So you can use a ruler, you can use tuna can, or well, you'll need a ruler, a tuna can or coffee cans, any kind of can with a flat side. And you'll need some kind of a timer. And you don't necessarily need 15 minutes, but that's just in there. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to run your system with these cans laid out around in this type of pattern. Hold on, let me go back to that slide. I went too far. Into this type of pattern to where, and you're going to run your system for a little while. And you want to record that time. If it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, you want to record that time. And then you want to take your ruler and you want to measure how much water is in each of those cans. And then you want to average that up. That's also going to reveal any wet spots, dry spots, places where you're getting over irrigated, under irrigated on your lawn, because uniformity is important to having successful low amounts of water and application rates, right? So, and then we're going to take that and we're going to average it up and we're going to throw a formula at you for to calculate your precipitation rate. The other way you can do it, right? The simpler way is what I call the meter method. And you turn on, you look at your meter, your water meter, and you write down how much, what the meter says. You make sure everything is turned off. Turn on your irrigation system for 1 or 2 minutes, and then turn it off, and then go back and look at the meter again. And that's going to tell you exactly how many gallons per minute went through that zone. And then with that, we're going to be able to calculate a precipitation rate and a run time. So instead of doing the whole catch can test. But what we're looking at is how much water do we need to replace, and how much water, how do we figure out how much water our sprinkler system uses to replace that water that we've left. You can see buffalo grass is very, very low, right? We don't need a whole lot of supplemental irrigation for buffalo grass. Whereas like your tall fescue, remember that cool season grass, 50 to 54% of that needs to go on there. And then your St. Augustine grass, right? That evil St. Augustine grass is kind of right there in that middle. Now, obviously Bermuda grass is much lower, but if it's a high traffic area or a high stress area, then you're going to need more, right? So when we're talking about replacement, we talk about your yard needs 1 inch of water per week, right? So, well, let's back that off. Okay, if we're down to 20% of that 1 inch of water per week, right? You can see on the far left, your grass is still going to be alive. It's just not going to look real good. And that's where we're going to get when we get into like really severe drought conditions. 40% replacement, looking a little bit better, 60%. The grass is looking pretty healthy at 60%. I'm good with 60%, right? 80 and 100%, that's too much, right? Now that's a little too much. So I'm happy with 60%. So I'm not going to do the full 1 inch of water. I may only do half an inch, right? Or I may do 3/4 of an inch. So to get your precipitation rate, this is your formula for your precipitation rate, okay? You have your gallons per minute if you did the meter method, right? So, and then you've got the conversion factor of 96.3, and you'll need to measure out your area. You'll need to know how much square footage you're doing, you're watering, right? Or you're measuring, and that's going to give you your precipitation rate. And here we're going to get to how you can actually calculate a runtime with that information to go get to fine tune your sprinkler system to when you're looking at a recommendation, you know how to actually apply that to your controller, right? So we need to know 2 things. We need to know our plant water requirement. Okay, so we've been told 1 inch per week is our requirement. So we'll go with that, makes the math easy. We got our precipitation rate. We did that either through our catch can test or our meter method, right? Here we've got 0.69 inches an hour is our precipitation rate. Here's the breakdown of the formula over here on the right, right? So we're looking at 87 minutes a week of runtime. So we're going to break that down to probably 2 days a week. Okay, so we're looking at 43 minutes each time, or I broke it down to 44 minutes. And then we're going to do a cycle and soak where we're going to break that down into 3 start times because we want to push that water down into the root zone, remember? So we're going to do 15-minute cycles. Setting up cycle and soak, and again, another really long webinar, but there's all kinds of resources on how to do that. But if you follow those steps and you program your controller based on that information on these runtimes here, this runtime calculator, now we can really break it down to how long does my sprinkler need to run to put that much water out, right? So with this example here, my water requirement is half an inch a week, right? So my precipitation rate is 0.86. So 35 minutes per week is what I need to achieve that half an inch. If I'm doing a 1 inch, right, then obviously that's going to go up. I'm going to be at like 70 inches per week. And then, so if you program based on this with your controller, right, you can use what is called your seasonal adjust feature, and you can adjust based on either the seasons, like it says, or you can adjust based on what the watering recommendation is. If the recommendation is half an inch, or the recommendation is 3/4 of an inch, then you can use that seasonal adjust to make those adjustments, right? And probably one of the best tools you can get for all of this is a rain gauge, right? If you get an inch of rain, then you don't need to water, right? If you get half an inch of rain, you probably don't need to water, right? So use the rain gauge and pay attention to it, because that is going to be your best water source, right? And remember that we're just, if we go into dormancy, we're going to be okay, right? Remember this photo from back here, the grass that went completely brown and now it warmed up, or it greened back up in November. So, and deep and infrequent watering, right? So we want to water deep. We don't want to water all the time. We don't want the grass to expect that watering, right? One of the best tools that you can get is this guy right here. I don't know if you guys can see this, but this is a moisture meter. You can get these off Amazon. You can get like packages of 2 for like 12 bucks, right? That's the best thing at all. And what I've done with mine here is I've like put marks on it at inch marks. So I know when I push it down into my soil, I know where my moisture is. Am I getting deep enough with my moisture with my watering? How deep is it down in the bottom of my soil? And you can just poke that in the yard in a few places and really get a good idea of actually where you're at with moisture, right? Don't be this guy with the water running down the street, right? Use cycle and soak, whether you're in a flat area, whether you're on a slope, right? And I'll give you a little bit of a schedule of what cycle and soak kind of looks like, right? Basically, we're taking one long run time and we're breaking it down into 2 or 3, maybe even 4 shorter run times. If you have a heavy slope, 4 is definitely where you want to be. But you can see every controller has multiple start times in it. So we're setting up these multiple start times, but we're breaking down our run, right? Our 97 minutes, it was our total run time. With 2 cycles, we're gonna have to make some sacrifices, or we're gonna be at 96 minutes, right? All right, so we're losing a minute. I think we're gonna be okay if we lose a minute, right? We're gonna be all right there. Break it down into 3 cycles, 3 start times, right? You can see how each zone is running 3 times, but it's going to start at the first time. It's going to run through all of the 4 stations, right? And then it's going to sit until the next start time starts back up. And then it's going to go back to that first one, zone 1, and it's going to run through those 4 again. It's going to sit till the next start time. It's going to run through those 4 again. And you're still going to get the same amount of total minutes at the end of the week, but we've broken it, or the end of the run, but we've broken it down into multiple start times so we can really soak that water in, right? Kind of running out of time here, but we'll talk a little bit about some of keys to smart watering. And if you have an ET-based controller, like a smart controller, utilize that. Make sure you utilize appropriate setup for that, okay? Because it's only going to be as smart as the person programming it. If you get all the stuff mixed up on the programming, it's going to overwater, underwater, and you're going to be in bad situation. Don't water overnight. Water early in the morning. Don't overwater your turf grass. Again, we talked about that. And keep your lawn mowed at a good height the whole time. And here are the smart controllers. And Charles Swanson is going to be there next month to talk about all of these smart controllers and everything that is available. If you're a technology guy, there's soil moisture sensors. Here's a case of watering at night. And here's what you get when you get to summertime and you've done all of that watering. Don't be this person. And we're not even going to talk about aeration because I'm out of time, but we want to talk about balance, keep it all balanced, and we'll be in really good shape. And that's it. It's me. Oh, I got a minute left. Oh man, it's pretty good. So I am available for questions, you can text me, you can email me. Here's my information. And here are a couple of websites you can also go to and look at for all of that.
Wow, thank you so much, Dean. Really fabulously helpful information. Just chock full. And I know we kind of rushed there at the end, but
Yeah.
we had already discussed that we probably would not have time for pests and weeds or diseases. So I think you got through everything that we needed you today. And as you mentioned, we will have Charles Swanson, irrigation specialist with Texas A&M the School of Irrigation Professionals, and he will be our speaker for next month's webinar. So you can come back and learn more about irrigation and smart controlling at that webinar. And we answered all of our questions from our participants during the breaks that we had. And let's see, we may have one open. Let's see, we may have one time. Was just a thank you. Looking forward to the recording link. And so if you can always come back and rewatch and watch those slides through again if you missed something, and we will follow up with an email right after the presentation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. We're always here to answer questions, just an email away. So.
Yes, and as Dean mentioned, we are here. We have a phone desk that you can call. We'll send you that phone number and our email address as well. And thanks so much. That's all the time we have today. We'll follow up individually after this presentation with a recording link, links to all of those fabulous resources that Dean shared with you, and how to contact us. Thank you, Dean. I really appreciate your dedication to water conservation and for your calm and measured way of explaining what can be some pretty complicated information out there on fertilization and lawn care and management. And this is kind of confusing. You did a great job. Turf grass does get vilified, but as you pointed out, with proper management, it can have a place in a water conserving landscape.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We love our turf grass. We tend to love it to death sometimes, so be careful.
Very good point. That's absolutely true. And thank you to our attendees for participating. Very soon, as I said, you'll receive an extensive email, and that will include a link to a short survey that we'd really appreciate if you filled out for us. It helps give us information that keeps us funded. And so it's very, very important. Take 5 minutes or so of your time if you will just fill out that survey that we'll send you. And it'll also include a link to today's session, all the resources for further study and any websites or source material, and how to subscribe to notifications for future seminars and programs in this Drought to Deluge series. We thank you for joining us and happy gardening.
Thank you so much.